Okay. Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Because of the way timing worked out, we are gonna have to start right away. Because I pushed it a little too close to time. But hello, hello, welcome, welcome. Hello, hello, hello. Just gonna give it a minute or two for people to pop in. And also send a quick email. Okay. Just want to send her a quick message and be like, we'll be on in about like 5 minutes. I just want to give everyone a second to like join up and gather before I have her on. So welcome, welcome. One day I'll redeem first. I don't know if you're ever gonna beat Arg, and if not Arg, then probably not Shadow either. They're always here like immediately somehow. I don't know how. They just they just do it. They get it done. But today we have another author interview, which is super exciting. We're having author Katy Upperman on today. I'm a black magic man. I believe that. It fits with your max psycho points arc. It just fits. But yes, today we are going to have another author interview. Originally, we were not supposed to have back to back interviews like this, but the one from last week was postponed yesterday, and this is the one that was always scheduled for this time, so. Don't dox yourself this time, Crow. Listen, I'll do my best. I'll do my best. I have stopped just bothering to say, like, oh, don't call me by, like, my first name on stream, because now we've already all discussed it, so uh, it does feel like a little weird talking to like my IRL like author friends and being like, hey, I need you to like call me Crow on stream instead of like my actual name that you guys have always known me by. So I've just stopped telling them, so authors may just call me by name from now on. But that's fine, because it's just a first name. I feel like there's not that much you can do with that. Also, I've done much worse already, and so, I mean. All right, I'm just gonna give it another minute and see if people hop on. Got an IRL friend who I sometimes raid, who I'm afraid will call me my IRL sometimes too. Yeah, this is the biggest issue I have when I'm streaming with Shadow, because I've known her IRL for like freaking 15, 16 years. So like, I slip a lot and call her by her real name just because that's literally what I've always called her, which is bad. I'm just not very good at this. Known since like sixth grade, so probably almost 20 years at this point. It's just so hard not to slip. Especially like when you know each other IRL first and you've known each other for so many years. God, it's hard. It's hard. It sure is hard. All right, I think I'm gonna have you on. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do the intro and then I'll bring on our author. Shadow! Hello! You came just in time. I'm just about to start. Okay, are you ready for our super official intro? Welcome to Talk Story to Me, the live stream slash podcast where we interview authors live and everyone in chat is free to ask questions as long as they are respectful. Today we are going to be having Sorry, I got distracted by someone in chat. How dare you lie, Arg? How dare you lie? Um, this is the problem with live streaming also. I see things and I get distracted and I lose track of what I was saying. But today we are going to be having guest author Katy Upperman on to talk about her books. So let's go ahead and get her on call. And I will not dox myself today, probably, hopefully. Hello!
Hello.
Oh, one moment. I'm just getting your video up on screen. All right, there we go. Hi!
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How have you been?
Really good. I'm excited to chat with you.
Likewise. Also, I love the rainbow display of books in the background. That's so
Thank
pretty.
you. You can see the clear division between my books and my husband's books.
I'm
These are
just
not rainbow ordered.
Yeah, I struggle. Like, I love the rainbow order. I feel like I'm too, like, not color sophisticated enough to be able to pull that off. Like, I look at all of mine and I'm like, I don't know how to do that.
How to make it happen. Yeah, it took me a few tries to like it, but I do think it's kind of fun. It's hard to find things though.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But welcome. Everyone say hi to our guest author, Katy Upperman. Katy, do you want to go ahead and give, like, a short introduction of yourself to start?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Katy. I am an author. I have three books that are published now. Kizzy Max Holden, The Impossibility of Us, and How the Light Gets In. And my fourth book will be out on January 28th. It's called Everything I Promised You. I write kind of angsty, sad-ish, contemporary, like coming of age books, but they always end with a hopeful message, I think. So that's kind of my brand is books that might make you cry, I guess. I live in California. I have two daughters and a very cute dog, a couple of cats, and yeah, I just kind of try to stay busy with the writing and the parenting thing.
Wow, I can't even imagine, like, handling all of that all at once. I feel like I struggle enough with just being a writer without also being a mom and having so many pets. And do you work full time or?
I work part time. I just do an admin job, so it's very not creative, which I like because it leaves kind of the creativity for the book stuff. So yeah,
That's nice. That's still, like,
yeah,
way too much for me to handle all at once because being a parent is a full time job. So that is amazing. Good,
yeah. I
good
find
for
the
you.
busier I am, though, the more productive I am. If I have too much downtime, I get lazy.
I I know what you mean, weirdly enough. I feel like the sense of urgency makes you feel like you have to get things done, whereas when you have, like, a lot more free time, it's like, oh, I can do that whenever.
Yeah, you just kind of wasted away some time.
Yeah, so I guess, like, how did you get your start in writing?
So I never wanted to be a writer growing up. I
Hmm.
loved books. I was a big reader. I loved like Judy Blume and the Babysitter's Club and the Sweet Valley High books. But this was kind of before Twitter and social media, and I didn't really have access to writers the way that we do now, and so it always felt like kind of a celebrity job to me, like kind of unattainable. Um, so I was a teacher. I went to school for education, and I became a teacher, and I taught for several years until my oldest daughter was born. And then I stopped teaching to stay home with her, which I really enjoyed. But I was also a little bit bored. You know, she was a baby and she would nap, and I would have little to do. So I started reading again. I had read a lot as a teenager and then I had kind of fallen away from it. But I started reading a ton. I read the Twilight books, um, as one does. And
As one does, as we all have done. Let's be
yes,
honest.
that was my gateway sort of into YA. So I read that and I kind of thought, if Stephanie Meyer can do it, she's like a mom, she's just like a normal gal and she's doing it. So maybe it's something I could try as well. So I started kind of just toying with stories, just kind of for myself, for fun. But I really loved it. It was such a fun, creative outlet, and it gave me like a goal to work toward. that was separate from being like a mom and a wife, which, was very important to me. But it's always nice to kind of have your own lane of interests
Oh,
and
for
goals.
sure.
Yeah, so it gave me that. And then I read If I Stay by Gail Forman. And that was, I remember being like the first YA book that I read where I thought, like, I'm going to write a book that makes readers feel the way that this book is making me feel. Like, it just felt so real. And I was so connected to the characters and like so invested in the story and what was going to happen next. And I loved that book, and I accept no criticisms of it to this
No,
day.
I
Um,
absolutely feel the same. It's such a good book. Someone in
it's
chat
so
also said, "I adore If I Stay."
It's such a good book. Yeah, I
So
actually just read her newest book that's coming out in January. And I don't think anything will ever take the number one spot away from If I Stay, but
good. Mm.
this newest one, it's called Afterlife, and it's very beautiful as well. So yeah, so that was kind of my start into writing. It took me like I think like 10, 11 years to get published. I wrote, I think, 3 or 4 books before I was able to get a book deal, get an agent and a book deal, um, which is kind of how we connected. So yeah, it's a long, slow process, but it's worth it, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny because we were just talking the other day about how so many authors, like the first book they write is not the first book they get published. Like there's such like a learning process that occurs with storytelling. Like sometimes you get to the end of a book and you realize, oh, maybe this isn't the one, or there are too many like foundational issues. Sometimes you write them for like practice.
Yes,
So,
I think so.
so how did you know when you had a book that was like ready and you were like, this is the one, this is the one that I'm ready for publication?
Well, I think I was a little bit delusional, and I think you have to be a little delusional to be a writer. Like you have to think your stuff is good, even if it's not yet, to keep going. I think.
Yeah.
So the very first book I wrote was I think it was like 140,000 words, which is nuts. Like that is not an acceptable word count for really any YA novel, especially not a first YA novel. Um, and I thought that that book would be like the exception to the rule, and it would get me an agent, and it obviously did not. And then I wrote what would later become my debut. I wrote that book second, and then I rewrote it like 3 or 4 times, like pretty much from scratch, and hanging on to the romance. Um, so that was really the first book that I thought, like that I could imagine other people reading and maybe enjoying. But it took a lot. I like to write drafts really poorly first, and then go back and spend a really long time fixing them. So that's kind of my process. But yeah, it takes years and a lot of determination and a little bit of a little bit of
I felt
delusion.
that. I felt that in my soul. I was like, yes, yes, it does. I feel
A
like
lot of no.
Yeah, I feel like before I entered like the publishing industry, I had a very shallow idea of what happened behind the scenes. I thought you just sold a book and it was that easy and then it was just published and it was out there. I had no idea like about the whole querying process and like all of the revisions that happen. And I feel like revision especially is something we kind of don't talk about enough. So, kind of jumping off of that, Kissing Max Holden was your first book, right?
Right, yes.
So, how different did the draft that you initially sold look compared to the very final version that was eventually published? Like, how did that revision process go?
It looked um it looked pretty different. I think the romance really was what kind of stayed the same, which is always like what I'm most invested in and when I'm writing a book anyways. Like I don't think I would ever write a book that didn't have a strong romantic thread just because that's what inspires me and interests me. So that actually stayed pretty much the same, give or take, some tweaks. But like there's kind of a subplot with Jillian and her dad's activities that really developed through the revision process. And I think just kind of strengthening the characters and raising the stakes is, I think, probably my biggest weakness as a writer. I never want to like upset my characters or challenge them too much or hurt them, which is so silly, right? they're pretend. But it hurts me to hurt them. So that's always my biggest challenge. So I often have like my critique partners, my agent or my editors saying like, how can we make this worse for them so that it's more satisfying when it gets better. So that was a big part of developing that first book.
Yeah, that's always so hard because you want your characters to like be happy, but you also have to have them struggle so that they can grow as people and like get their happy ending and have it feel like super earned and like the catharsis
Yeah,
at the end. But it's so hard.
it is so hard. I know. If I could just write like fun banter and like first kisses just forever.
Aww.
That would be my sweet spot. But yeah, they have to have some growth in that book somewhere. It's not really a story. So
Yeah. So you mentioned that romance is like a big draw to writing for you. As someone who struggles writing romance but absolutely loves like reading it, how do you kind of keep each of the romances like fresh and unique and different for you in each of your books?
that's a good question. I don't know. I've never really thought about that. I think because the characters for each book are so different, um, the romances hopefully feel different as well. And I like a trope. So I like Kissing Max Holden is a boy next door trope. I like a second chance romance or like a best friends turn sweethearts. I like those kinds of tropes. So if I can get behind a new trope, then it usually will help the romance to kind of be fresh to me and then hopefully to readers. And then just kind of keeping the characters always kind of with tension between them is so fun for me. So that's kind of my favorite part of writing a book is them getting to know each other and then them butting heads for whatever reason and then like coming back together and figuring it all out.
Aw, I love that. Do you think you would ever consider writing like not necessarily adult romances, but adult stories with romances in them? Like, what is it that
Yeah,
draws you to YA in particular?
I don't know. I don't know. I like had a fine, my teenage years were not traumatic or terrible. Like I don't feel like I need to like fix them through my writing or anything like that. It was all pretty boring. Um, I just love like the coming of age, I think. And for teenagers, everything is like heightened, I feel like, and just extra intense. And they have such a sense of like invincibility, I guess. So it's just really fun to get into their heads and experience like a first love or a first heartbreak or applying to colleges. Just all those like firsts for teenagers, I think is so interesting. When I started writing the very first manuscript I wrote, I didn't even think like this is a YA book. It was just automatically a teenager, and it kind of has been that way ever since. But I would really like to write an adult romance one day. I don't write like rom-coms though. I don't feel like it's super funny on the page. So that seems to be really what's popular right now. So I'm waiting for the more angsty romance to be back on trend, I guess.
Yeah, the trends always come back around, so nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. Like, rom coms are so hard to write because I don't think of myself as someone who's like funny.
Yeah.
It's so hard to like write humor on the page, especially because like people have such different senses of humor, and some things sound funnier in your head than they come across in paper. It's a
Yeah.
difficult genre to write. I have a lot of respect for anyone who does rom com or comedy in general.
I do too. I read a lot of adult like rom-com books and I love when I can like actually laugh out loud at a book. It doesn't happen that often, but if I can, that feels like such a success, for me and hopefully for the for the writer as well,
Yes.
because it's hard to be funny on demand like that.
I know. And you would think like, oh, I have time to like think it through. Like there's no
Mhm.
rush, but like I feel like that's almost harder because it's like, well, yeah, there's no rush, but then that makes it feel like, well, now I have no excuse if it's not funny because I had time to think about it.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, you have no leeway.
So, I guess like, do you want to take us through your kind of publication journey from Max Holden to up through everything I promised you that's coming out up in January?
Yeah. So, um, Kissing Max Holden, like you, was published through Swoon Reads, which is not in operation anymore. But it was kind of a crowdsourced publishing model, I think was really unique to the market. So I like posted this manuscript online for public consumption, um, with the understanding that if it did well in this forum and if the editors liked it, then it could get a publishing contract. And it did, which was amazing because I had an agent and she had put that book out on submission, but it wasn't, and it still isn't, like very high concept book. It's very much like a coming of age story. It doesn't have any like, I don't know, high concepts. So it did do really well. People were excited to read it. They left a lot of really complimentary feedback, which was lovely. And then I got that email saying that Swoon Reads wanted to publish it. So it was published and it was amazing. I was really excited. It continued to get pretty good feedback, although some people really got angry that there was cheating in it. That was like the biggest like hate reviews that I got, was people were really angry that these 17-year-olds could not be faithful to one another, which, you know, they're
I mean,
17.
yeah, they're kids. Also, people make mistakes and poor choices, and I feel like that's a aspect of being human.
Yeah, and also it's not like a manual to how to behave. It's fiction. So um, I had that book published, and then a year later, I had my second book, The Impossibility of Us, published, which was a National Novel Writing Month book. I drafted the first 50,000 words during National Novel Writing Month, and I really am proud of that book. I really kind of love it. It's one of my faves if I was going to pick a favorite. And then the year
Did
after that, my third book came out. That was in 2019. How the Light Gets In, which is definitely contemporary, but there is a ghost story aspect to it, so it's a little bit. I would not call it paranormal, but it has that kind of. I don't know. You have to use your imagination a little bit with that one. And then I had like a long break without any books coming out because Swoon Reads, I think, was kind of starting to kind of shutter, and COVID happened. And so I'm actually, in hindsight, very thankful that I didn't have any books come out during COVID, because that did not seem like an ideal situation to publish under.
yeah.
But I did write a lot during that time. I wrote a kind of Parent Trap ish, like beach book, which is going to come out in 2026. And then I wrote Everything I Promised You, and was able to sell that to a different publisher, which I'm so thankful for. It was like a dream editor situation. And I like keep thinking to myself, yeah, I feel so fortunate and thankful, that I get to work with this team of people and that folks are going to get to read this book that I'm really proud of. So yeah, it's been a pretty smooth, though, like I said, long path of publishing.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you found another publishing house that like you're really happy with, and you have an editor that it sounds like you must share the same vision and you like working together. That's always so important.
I think so. Yeah, she's very lovely. She's like very collaborative without being like, do it this way. She like will kind of just ask questions that help me like think more deeply about the themes or the characters or whatever. And yeah, it's just been so um like easy, I guess, working with her, and just so pleasant.
Aw,
So it's been great.
good. Excellent. That's the ideal writing experience in publishing.
And I know I feel
So,
like I should not.
so you mentioned Impossibility of Us is probably your favorite if you had to pick one. What about that book makes it your favorite?
Well, it's kind of, I kind of describe it as like a Romeo and Juliet story, but with a happy ending. So there's not a tragedy at the end. But it's very like um, two people who, for many, many reasons, should not be together that fall for each other regardless. So I love that aspect of it. That kind of romance is really fun to figure out and to write. And then it's like a dual point of view. So it's mostly told from the female character's point of view, but there are chapters in that book told from the male character's point of view in reverse. So he like writes poetry, and so all of his chapters are told in verse, which, like, I do not consider myself to be a poet, but they were so fun to write, and they're like some of my favorite little scenes in that book. So yeah, that book was just a really that book and Everything I Promised You just felt like a very um, effortless writing experience, whereas some books feel like you're really climbing uphill to get there to the end. But these two, I mean, they were not without challenge, but they just were very joyful writing experiences for me. So
Aw. Oh, good. I'm so glad. And I'm glad Everything I Promised You also had kind of that same vibe of like really being
yeah,
effortless to write.
yeah, it
And
was
that,
fun.
what a cool format choice with, or style choice with writing all of his character chapters in verse. Like, that's so interesting. I love the sound of
It
that.
was, thank you. Yeah, people sometimes I'll see like I always read my reviews, which you're not supposed to probably do as a writer, but
It's okay, I do
I do.
too.
Okay. I always feel like a little bit, I don't know, masochistic, like reading these reviews. But um, I've seen several that say like, "Oh, I never thought I would like, verse in a novel, but this worked." So that makes me happy.
Aw. Yeah, it's so hard because I know you probably have this internal debate too. I know I'm not supposed to read reviews, and that is like a purely reader space, and I would never like try to infringe on it or like insert myself into it. But I'm also always so curious, like, what do people think about my books? Like, are they good? Are there things I could
Yeah,
improve upon? Like, tell me.
yeah.
But
It can be like a really nice little boost of confidence, I guess. Just like if I'm drafting something and it's, a first draft is never like shiny and beautiful.
yeah.
So sometimes if I'm like really feeling stuck, I'll go read a nice review of a book that is finished. And that sometimes is like the boost I need to get back to it. Just so silly.
No, I feel like there's nothing wrong with like wanting validation for like all of this hard work you're doing. Because I feel like often as a writer, like so often like no one sees your work for so long, but you've put in so many like years often into it and like so much time and effort and energy and thought. So like I feel like it's natural to want to know like what others think.
Yeah, yeah. It's fun, usually.
So someone in chat asked, what inspired you in coming up with the story and characters for Everything I Promised You?
So I am really like a plotter. I like to plot a whole book before I ever start drafting it. But this particular book, I just had like a scene in mind, like a very specific scene. And I kept thinking, like, I don't really want to start writing a new book right now. It's like not a good time. But I had this scene in my head. And so I thought, maybe I'll just like write this scene as just like a short little, not, it wouldn't even be a short story. It would be like a tiny little snippet. And then I can like get it out of my imagination and move on to things I should actually be doing. And so I wrote that scene, which is in the book, like smack in the middle. So I wrote that scene and then I started to think like, could this be a book? Like, how could I make this work? And I never really did plot this book somehow, which is so crazy because I'm like so type A. Um, I like jumped around a lot. It's told in a before and after format. So
Hmm.
when I would get stuck like on that before scene, I would just jump to an after scene and vice versa. Um, so yeah, that one little nugget of a scene was like the original inspiration. And then I was very inspired by, I had read an adult romance about a woman whose fiance like just died tragically, and I kept thinking like, what would it be like for a teenager if this person who they thought was like the love of their life that they would be with forever suddenly was taken from them, and like how would they ever climb back out of that hole. So yeah, that was kind of like where my initial idea jumped from, and then it just kind of took off from there.
That sounds really cool. Can I ask what the scene was, or is it too spoilery?
No, it's not spoilery. It's totally random, and I had to like make figure out a way to even make it like relevant. But it was just like a reunion scene between these two characters who like were kind of like circling each other, not quite sure if they should give romance a shot or not, and then they kind of jointly decide yes and kind of come back together in this random parking lot. And that was the scene. And again, I thought like, oh, that would be so cute, and I'll just put it down on paper and like put it away, and it grew from there. So
That's so cool. And what an interesting like writing process, like skipping back and forth between before and after that scene. That sounds like such a fun way of like discovery writing and seeing like what the story is about and how it progresses.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad. I'm very type A, like I said, so I never had like really given myself permission to do that because it just felt like too chaotic, and I like a very linear approach normally. So now that I've kind of seen that that can work, I do it much more often now because I don't know, like if the words aren't flowing in one scene, why not switch to another one? So
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that says you have to work in a linear pattern, especially if it's not working. That's so
yeah, exactly.
cool. So I feel a little bad. I kind of skipped over when the light, how the light gets in, unintentionally. Do you want to talk about that book a little bit? That was your previous book that just came out. Well, not just. It's the book that
Yeah.
came out most recently, not counting everything I promised you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So that book I wrote. I wrote that. This is confusing. Before The Impossibility of Us, but it was published after. So it was another one that I had to like rewrite multiple times to figure out. Um, but it's about a girl who, again, like loses somebody important in her life, her little sister, like very tragically in this accident, and um, she returns kind of to the scene of the crime, if you will, a year later. It's this coastal town, and she's staying the summer with her aunt, and her and her sister had this huge kind of falling out right before the sister drowns. And so she's kind of revisiting all of these memories, and um, it turns out her sister's spirit may not actually be gone. And so she kind of is grappling with how to forgive herself and how to forgive her sister for her perceived crimes. So yeah, it's another kind of grief book. And then there's a cute blonde water polo player who is the romantic interest and kind of like lightens things up a little bit. So
aw. And what was kind of the inspiration for that one? Because that's the only one you've written. It sounds like that has like kind of a mystical, magical element to it with the sister spirit. So it was kind of
yeah.
the jumping off point.
So I originally wanted to write, this is weird in hindsight, but like a ghost story where the ghost was the romantic interest. And the more I explored that, the less I liked that idea. It just seemed too too off the wall for me to pull off. I'm sure people have done it wonderfully, but it wasn't coming for me. So I changed it to um I changed the ghost to originally an antagonist, not even a sister. And
Oh.
he was um kind of problematic in hindsight. And so my editor at Swoon Reads suggested making it like more of a sister story and like really focusing on the sister relationship. And from there it like really became a story that worked, I think. So yeah, it's kind of open ended too, because you're never quite sure if the ghost is real or if it's all in the main character's imagination. I kind of like left it up to the reader to decide how they wanted to interpret those interactions. Um, so yeah, it was another fun one, and I was very inspired. It's set on the Oregon coast in this um, fictional town that was really inspired by Cannon Beach, if you're familiar in Oregon. It's where parts of the Goonies was filmed. It's just this very cool, like charming little town. So the inspiration for the um, setting was like really fun to explore too.
Oh, that sounds so cool. And what a fun mix of like really cool concept with like amazing atmosphere with like the coastal town and just the debates going, the internal like conflicts going on. That just sounds so good.
Thank you. Thank you. It was fun to work on.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. So, you also mentioned that you had a beach book coming out in 2026. Would you like to talk about that at all, or would you rather kind of hold off on that till closer to time?
Yeah, I can. It hasn't really been edited yet, so I don't know what about it will change, if anything, drastically. But I mentioned it's kind of like a parent trap. That's the comp that my agent used for it is that movie, The Parent Trap, where it's like a setup story. So it's a teenage girl and a teenage boy, and she's been raised by her much older sister, and he is visiting his dad in Florida. The story is set in Florida, and both of the adults in their lives drive them nuts, and so they've got this plan to set her sister up with his dad so that they kind of get off their backs so that they can like enjoy their summer. So complications arise from that, and then of course the two teenagers begin to fall for each other. So it
Oh,
was. I like a beach book.
beach books are good.
Cannot help myself.
Oh, and I love that it's a beach book that also just takes place in Florida. How
Yeah,
perfect.
I'm trying to make my way around the whole United States coasts. Yeah.
Yeah, like what is. Because you mentioned like there was a specific town in Oregon that inspired you for the setting with how the light gets in. How do you
Mhm.
kind of choose your settings for a book?
I often use places we live. My husband is in the military, so we move a lot. So we've lived in a lot of different places. So Kissing Max Holden, I wrote when we were living in Washington State, and it's set there. And then The Impossibility of Us is set. Again, I always fictionalize the towns just so I can design them exactly how I need them to be, but they're always inspired by like real places. So The Impossibility of Us was Carmel by the Sea, which is like my favorite town in the whole world, maybe,
Aww.
like on the central California coast. And then let's see, How Light Gets In was Oregon. Everything I Promised You is the main character's dad is in the army. So it's set into like military towns. So partly in Tennessee and partly my dog.
I was wondering when I heard this snuffling.
Just
Aw.
yeah.
How
And then
could you
partly
ignore
in
Sweet Pepper?
DC. And then, yeah, Florida. We used to live in Northwest Florida, just north of Destin. And so Destin was kind of the beach town inspiration for that 2026 book. That is titleless at the
That sounds
moment.
so cool, though. Do you think you would ever be interested in writing like a story that doesn't take place in like the real world, whether it be fantasy or just like a kind of made up setting that's not based on in reality? Like, do you think that's something that would ever interest you, or?
I don't know. I love reading books like that are like very immersive in a very like fantastical setting. Um, I have never I don't know. I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I have that specific kind of creativity, but I do think it would be really fun to try. And I do like world building, just world building in the real world more so than like a fantastical setting. But I do love a fantasy book to read.
Well, I guess that I don't know if this is like too similar of a question, but what is it that kind of draws you in about like writing contemporary fiction, especially?
I personally like stories that are grounded in the real world. Um, I don't know. That's a great question because, like I said, I like to read all different genres of story. But as far as writing goes, maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe just the way my imagination works. But that's always been kind of my go-to. Aside from that ghost story, which I did have to kind of like establish rules for the ghost and things that I've never really had to do before in my like firmly contemporary books. So I don't know, it'd certainly be a really cool challenge to try to figure out like a whole new world, but it sounds daunting.
And that's how I feel about writing contemporary fiction because I have so much for respect for people who can make everyday life feel like so immersive and intense and immediate because I feel like I almost rely on like fantasy elements to kind of up the stakes and make things like even more heightened all the time. So I feel like if you
Yeah.
can have that same kind of pull and in contemporary fiction, like that's so impressive.
Isn't that funny? Like the grass is like greener or because I always think like well, I'm so impressed by people who can just pull a whole world out of scratch or I guess sometimes they're inspired by things in history and whatever, but that just it's very cool that people can do that.
I love writing. I feel like you really learn like how different writing can be based on like the genres that you are writing. And then when you attempt to write a different genre and you're like, "Oh, there are so many different like strengths and weaknesses to my personal skills in writing this particular type of thing." It's just
Yeah.
very eye-opening. It's very cool.
It really, yeah. I said I would never write a book without romance, but I did over the summer write a picture book, which obviously does not have romance, but it's like 700 words, which is nothing, right, compared to a novel, but it was so challenging in like these completely new ways. And like, just so it was really fun to write. Um, yeah, I feel like I really stretched my creativity with that. So
Yeah,
I don't know,
because I feel
maybe
like
I'll,
limitations like really force you to like kind of stretch your abilities. Like poetry is probably what I would consider one of the hardest things to write because you have such a short amount of space to convey so much. Like every single word counts. And I imagine it's the same with when you were writing a picture book. Like you have to be aware of every single word and make sure they're all serving a purpose.
yeah, yeah, I did. Like, I would go through it and make sure that like every single word was like thoughtful and maybe even like doing double duty in some cases because you're so crunched for space in a picture book. But yeah, it was a cool exercise. I would definitely do that again.
That sounds so cool. While we're kind of on the topic, what have you found to be kind of your biggest struggle in writing that you've had to like kind of overcome or learn how to deal with?
So as far as like the actual story stakes, like, and even just plotting, like like I said, I like a meandering conversation and things like that. So like figuring out a plot with emotional growth I can do, like the character growth I can do, but like figuring out like what is going to happen to like outwardly physically challenge the character and like push them is more challenging for me. I love character development. I love like word choice and like the fine tuning and things like that. I love revising. Drafting is my least favorite part of the writing process just because if I think some people like love a blank page and like see all this possibility in like an open brand new Word document, but that is just so intimidating to me, like starting from absolutely nothing. So that is why I've written several of my books during National Novel Writing Month, just because like setting that public goal and like having all these thousands of people doing it alongside you is I find to be very motivating when it comes to drafting.
Yeah, like I guess that kind of leads into my next question. Like if you find yourself like stuck, like when you're trying to figure out like how do you up the stakes? Like how do you get the plotting? Like what are kind of your go-tos for trying to problem solve? Like do you have a group you go to and like kind of brainstorm with? Do you kind of just take a walk, leave it sit for a while? Like what how do you kind of handle that?
I do take a walk. That is like a big one for me. My dog is like my best bud. And so we take a lot of walks anyways. And that's
Oh.
either I will listen to an audiobook or I will like think about whatever I'm working on during those walks. And I've like solved a lot of problems on dog walks and driving. If my kiddos are not in the car and I'm driving, I can figure out a lot of stuff while I'm just on the road, focusing on that. And then I have two like writer besties who I bounce a lot of problems off of and who have really good ideas. And then my agent, she came to agenting from editing. And so she has a really strong like editor background. And so she always has really good ideas. Even if I don't take like her idea, usually her ideas will like spawn new ideas for me. So she's super helpful as well.
That's so
Sometimes my
nice.
husband,
I love
occasionally.
aw. I love when an agent has like editorial feedback for you, like even before you go on submission, because it always feels so helpful to know that you have another set of like professional eyes on your work and that they're like helping you make it the most polished version it can be, even before it goes out to the editor.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you really only get one shot with an editor. And if it's not
Hmm.
as strong as possible, sometimes you lose it. So
Yeah. Just as a reminder, anyone in chat is totally welcome to ask questions at any point. It is a live interview, so feel free to ask questions live. Oh, speaking of, we just got a question. When you're writing books, do you let others read your drafts? And if so, how do you incorporate their feedback in your writing process?
so I don't let anyone read anything until I have it. I have the draft like as good as I can get it. I don't like any outward. Sometimes I'll give my agent like a concept just to make sure it's not something that she would hate. Um, but I like to write the full draft and then like revise it a few times before I show anyone because I don't know. I guess I just don't feel confident until I have it like as good as I can get it. Um, so once I have it like a pretty clean full draft, then I have those two writer besties that I talked about. They provide a lot of feedback for me. And then I have a 17-year-old. And so she actually was one of my very first readers for Everything I Promised You. I think she was 15 when she read it. And she gave me really good feedback. Um, and she was just like a cheerleader of the book, which was really fun to have like a real teenager like it and you know like want to keep reading. Um, and then my agent will read it before it ever like sees any other professional inboxes. So yeah, I definitely like feedback. I like people to give me their honest um, criticisms, I guess, and then I change kind of just what resonates with me. Um, so yeah, it's but I don't let people read like a chapter here or a chapter there because then I feel like I'll lose motivation if I get feedback before I'm ready for it, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And I feel like it fits overall anyway, because, like, while feedback on, like, a chapter as a standalone might be helpful, I feel like it's more helpful to get feedback on the whole. Unless there's,
Yeah.
like, a specific thing you're worried about, like, I don't know if this scene is working, but I feel like you kind of need the context of, like, the whole book to even know if, like, this one chapter is working, because maybe in the long run it's not even needed. So I feel like that makes sense to wait until you have, like, a whole draft to present.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's it's just kind of disruptive, I think, for me anyway. Otherwise, some people send their critique partners like chapter by chapter, but I don't know. I don't think I would. I don't think I would.
I think I struggle with that because a lot of times when I get to the end of a draft, I don't know if this happens with you, but there are so many things I already know I want to change before I want anyone else to see it. So, like, I might add in a side character, it just takes one out entirely. So, I feel like to get that kind of piece by piece feedback when I already know that there are things I want to change, I don't know that it would be super helpful for either of us.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I always I try not to like revise while I'm drafting, but I keep like a running list of like go back and fix this chapter or like you said like add in a character here or whatever so that I can then like do it all once I'm done with the zero draft is kind of how I think of a first draft. It's
Yeah.
still needs.
Yeah. Oh, we have another question. When you're writing a story, do you prefer having the overarching plot drive the story or have the characters themselves drive the narrative forward?
Characters for sure. I'm like very character driven writer. Um, I like to read a high concept book, like a plot driven book, fairly often, but I always like resonate with characters more so than the plot. I like if I can feel a strong connection to a character, then like the flaws in the plot don't even really register with me. So I like to write character driven books and I generally like to read them as well, which tend to be like I guess like quieter books. But I'm here for that. I like to be like in people's heads and see how they're growing and why they do the things they do and things like that.
Yeah, and I feel like a book doesn't have to be like high stakes all the time to be like emotionally resonant or impactful. So that just
That's
makes sense.
put that like on my website.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask everyone for their if they have any last questions, and while I wait to see if anyone does, do you have any advice for aspiring writers?
Yeah, I would say this is probably pretty common, but I always say like read as much as you can. Like read in the genre that you think you want to write in, but I also think it's really helpful and important to read in like varying genres just because I think there's lots to learn. Like with world building, like I build contemporary, like real life worlds, but it's so helpful to me to see how like a fantasy world is built and like all the different aspects of that. So I think that reading is huge. And then I always really try to pay attention to like if I don't like a book, it doesn't resonate with me. I try to figure out why. Like, is it the characters? Is it like does the dialogue not feel natural? Like whatever it is that isn't working for me, I try to like make a mental note of why because I think that that helps me. It's like your own. I feel like reading is like your own little MFA, kind of. Like you're really educating yourself for free by reading widely. Um, and I don't know, I just feel like the more you consume, the better you are going to kind of grow your own writing skills.
I definitely believe in that. Especially we were kind of talking earlier about like trying to write in different genres. Like I feel like reading in different genres also kind of shows you like how to develop different skills you might not have. Like we were talking about poetry and like how concise it has to be. So that could help like improve your overall writing. So I definitely think that's amazing advice. Just read widely and take kind of study as you're reading.
I also like to, like when I really love a book, or if I really dislike a book, I always go to Goodreads and I like to look at like the 5-star reviews and the 1-star reviews and just like see how different people respond to different stories. I just find it so interesting how a book can be like so beloved and then you've got like people who absolutely despised it. Like I want to know why. Like what
Yeah.
did not work for you? I don't know. It's so interesting to see like what resonates with people and what they're looking for in a book. It seems to be different for everyone. So
Yeah. I mean, that's the great thing about writing, though. Everyone enjoys writing different things and everyone enjoys reading different things. So every book has a reader, which is always encouraging.
that's right. That's right. So fun.
Someone asked, have you ever been tempted to try writing in a different genre entirely?
I not really. Not really. I am picture books I guess would probably be the most different thing I've written. I've like dabbled a little bit in adult romance and again I would really like to write a full adult romance someday. Um, but I don't like contemporary romance, whether YA or adult, is really like I just find it the most inspiring and the most interesting. And I don't know, I just can't really get away. I think it'd be so cool to like write a fantasy or a sci-fi or something like that, but it's just not my wheelhouse. Maybe someday. I don't know. Maybe someday I'll feel differently, but for now, I think I've kind of found my sweet spot.
Yeah, and I think so much of writing is about passion and writing what you're passionate about. And I think you can often tell, like, when you've read something that the author wasn't actually that excited about it or like a scene. So I think writing to what you love and what you're passionate about writing is always a good direction to go in.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Can you give us a reminder? When is Everything I Promised You coming out and where can you pre order it?
She will be out on January 28th. I am going to be doing like a signed pre-order, but that is not quite organized yet. It's coming. So that will be with a local independent bookstore here in Orange County. And then Barnes and Noble will have the book in a special like exclusive edition. So it will be a different cover and it will have like hot pink sprayed edges, which is like the coolest thing ever. So Barnes
Yeah.
and Noble is a good place to start. And then we'll be at like Books a Million and like the bigger bookstores. Hoping, fingers crossed, it might be a Target, but only time will tell. And then, of course, like Amazon and the library, of course. So if your library does not carry it or any other book that you would like to read, you can always request at your library. So it's
Oh,
super
that's so
helpful.
exciting. You'll have to let me know details about the pre order with your independent bookstore when you have the
Yeah,
details so I can share them.
I will definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we have any other questions, so thank you so much for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedule to answer our questions and just chat with us.
I'm so happy to. This was so fun. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for everybody who tuned in to listen.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I hope you take care.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone, that has been this episode of Talk Story to Me. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us today and having great questions for our author and just being a good audience and hanging out and listening with us. So, I hope you have an excellent rest of your night, day, wherever you may be, whenever you're listening to this, and take care. Until next time, bye. I'm not gonna dox myself this time, Arg. It's not gonna happen. Okay. Gonna just. Okay. Now it super won't happen. Look at me go. Not doxing myself. Aren't you proud? Aren't you proud? Alright. Sorry, everyone. I need just a second to get the mod pack set up. So this is not the end of stream. This is just the end of Talk Story to Me. And our interview with Katy Upperman. That was so fun! Oh. She just has so many cool ideas. I love it. So that was the end of that segment. So now we are going to be playing Lethal Company. However, Shadow did just send the new one about 50 minutes ago, so I'm hoping it works.